one of my favorite subjects, Rwanda. Anybody who knows me in the last year, you've heard me talk about this a lot. So you guys are in for a treat. These slides presentations got a lot of detail. It's also got a lot of pictures. So you got examples, and I can share a lot of my own personal stories and stuff like that as well. So there's a lot in this. You're going to get the background, the history, and the current Rwanda as well. So, and you know, we can be open about the challenges and stuff like that as well. There's no country that is just ideal. There's no leadership that's perfect. What we are in degrees of transition and degrees of excellence, if you want to put it that way, from very poor to very good. So my challenge for you today is this, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the best examples right now. So let's go. We'll just very quickly go through these again. This is what we cover every week. So everybody's been on the call before, so I'm assuming that it's the same people on the course. So you'll see the reflections in good leadership. This is what we're covering. And of course, we're going to look at the moral and all the development that's gone on in Rwanda, what's not working so well, what is working well, and how they're treating citizens. And that link to Africa in the broader sense, you'll see a very specific thing around the Pan-African leanings, or not, as the case may be. I'll talk about that as well. Okay. And we'll also see what can we learn for ourselves. Very interesting case study, I think, this one. Reflections on good leadership. So we talked about the Ibrahim Prize. Mo Ibrahim, who's a billionaire through telecoms, and set up this African prize, which he hasn't given out every year. And I always remind you that this prize is given out to former leaders. It's not given to current leaders. So if you're a current leader, like the leader of Rwanda and some of the other countries we mentioned so far, this prize won't go out to you. It's only when they leave office, this could be given to you. And some years they don't give it out. So it's quite interesting that it's quite a challenge to find people. So exceptional role models on the continent. So let's keep going, because what else? I always say what else, because I don't think that prize goes far enough, because I think this is one of the major issues. Honest, not corrupt. And this is an interesting one on Rwanda, because it's one of the top reasons why I think that the governance in Rwanda is a great example of leadership, because of the lack of corruption in the country. It's a major feature in most countries in the world, particularly African countries. Of course, this is where our people are from. So that's a major, major concern, because it doesn't matter how good your leadership is. If there's significant corruption in the country, that's a massive form of inefficiency, with resources not going to the people, money being siphoned off. And it means money you're getting in the country has to be double, trebled, and so on for you to get anything, because money is constantly siphoned outside of the country or into the hands of just a few people. Is there clear examples of social progress? We've seen this in different African countries, different levels of progress, and on women as well. And you'll see some things in Rwanda that are unique to Rwanda, and I think a particularly good example when it comes to the role of women. Is the economy left strong if that leader leaves or they've left? I think that's an interesting one too. Strong and good institutions, very interesting as well. You'll be hearing about that. Pan-African policy direction, you'll be hearing about that. Plans for succession, interesting one on this one, but I can only reflect on some of the comments that have been made and things that have been said. And this is where we are. So we've done 3 so far, and this is the 4th. We did Zimbabwe last week, and we're now on Rwanda. Now it's interesting, the World Happiness Report. I haven't got enough evidence on how is this determined and where they are, because I was surprised at this. The happiness report, but it covers a wide range of things. But it'd be interesting to, maybe at the end, we'll go back and reflect on this a little bit more, on the happiness report, because I can't believe that Rwanda is as low as that. And I'll tell you why shortly. Okay, because it's close to South Sudan, and there's no comparison whatsoever between the two, in my view. Anyway, that's where we are. So let's start. We always start with a population and a map. So we're talking about 12 million population, and you see this is central to East Africa. So you'll see to the east is Tanzania, which is a much, much bigger country. Rwanda is a tiny country in African sense, tiny country. You can 3 hours from Kigali, you can be at the border, I think, of any of these countries. 3 hours either way. Okay. And when I was there, I flew into Kigali and we took a day trip out to the coast where you see Lake Kivu on the west here. So we went out to Lake Kivu and we went to the border of Congo. And then we toured around the lakes and we visited various hotels and so on around the lake. And then we traveled back. So that was an interesting experience. And that was about a 3-hour drive to get there. So you'll see to the north is Uganda, again, a much bigger country. Congo, a huge country in Central Africa, much, much bigger than Rwanda. So they're surrounded by big countries. Burundi, much smaller country, much more comparative to Rwanda is Burundi. But Burundi, very poor in comparison, lots of governance issues and so on by comparisons. But anyway, that's where Rwanda is. Let's look at the history here. Let's go back now. And let's look at where Rwanda, it was a German colony, because some people don't think Germany had any colonies, but Germany has always dabbled in Africa, constantly dabbling in Africa. And that's where the war started. The so-called First and Second World War was a fight over Africa. We've talked about that before. So 1919, the system of indirect rule continued with Rwanda as a mandate territory for the League of Nations under Belgium. So the League of Nations, remember the League of Nations is only European countries. So just like United Nations when it first started was virtually all Europeans. And so the League of Nations was even worse, was before United Nations. So it's basically Europe just deciding what they wanted to do with the world. And they gave it to Belgium as a Belgian territory. Okay, and the Hutus ruled at that time. Independence was in 1962, the so-called independence from Belgium, after 3 years of armed struggle. So again, Belgium didn't let go. You had to fight to get independence. There was steady economic growth until the crash in coffee prices in the 1980s. It wasn't a great successful story in terms of economic progress and the development of the people, but nevertheless, there was steady economic growth, even though it was at a low level. And then, but again, because of the cash crop concept of many African countries, when coffee prices crashed, it hurts the economy because the economy wasn't diversified, very much around agriculture, which it still is strongly today, but much more diversification today than it was then. So just like we talked about in Zimbabwe, Rwanda took out IMF loans and the structural adjustments. And we all know what happened in Zimbabwe and many parts of the world when you do this. Large devaluations of the currency, removal of official prices. And this just hurts the people, basically. Okay, because it means your money's worth less and any foreign goods and imports will be more expensive. So whilst devaluation can help people locally for local goods and local services, but anything that's imported in a country that hasn't got much internal markets and internal products means that everything external into the country, oil, everything that's imported will be more expensive. So it tends to hurt the poor more. Okay. But if you're from outside the country, it makes everything cheaper. So if you've got foreign currency or you're an external investor, then it becomes cheaper to invest in the country. So that's what devaluations cause. So there was a big drop on real income, and the ruling class was hit mainly because when there's a big drop in income, that's another thing that it predominantly hurts the middle class in a sense, because they're the only ones with an income. See, if anybody understands Africa, most people in Africa don't have an income, salary, wage as such. They have income as in cash coming in, but most people are not employed formally in this formal structure. So they're not necessarily waged or salaried people. So when there's a big hit on the economy in that sense, the informal economy might get hit, and that's where your income gets hurt. But people on salaries are going to get hit first because they're the ones in the formal structure. So then when those get cut, they get hurt. So when governments say we're spending less and the IMF World Bank says you've got to contract your state, a lot of people lose their jobs and a lot of either pay gets dropped or people get made redundant. So it really hurts. So state-owned enterprises will be hit as well. Now, before the genocide, 1959 revolution, there was a first revolution in 1959. That was the first war and the first massacre of 20,000 Tutsis killed and 300,000 into exile. So that was what they call the first revolution. It's a bit like Cuba. When we talk about Cuba, they had the first revolution, the second revolution. Everybody only remembers the second one, but there was an early genocide. This should be a warning of danger as well. From 1959, that was just before independence, right? Rwanda was very poor, 90% living off the land. Not dramatically changed, but some has changed. But the level of wealth of the rest has made a big difference in Rwanda. So Hutu and Tutsi shared common culture and language. In my view, it's a sham. The whole Hutu and Tutsi concept is a sham created by the Belgians anyway. Many of the so-called ethnicities, so-called different groups in Africa are not a sham, but that people make more of it than in reality it is. It's a bit like the French and it's probably even worse actually. The example of me showing the French and I was going to say the French and the English, that's not a good example. It's probably better to say Scottish, Welsh, and English, because the Scottish, Welsh, and English, if I said to you, what is the cultural differences between them? I reckon most people would struggle to say what the cultural differences are between them that are not superficial. So things like, yes, Scottish people wear kilt, and obviously we have Gaelic, we have the language, but the language is not predominant. It's not a predominant difference because most people in Scotland and Wales speak English, and of course the English speak English. So the Welsh have their own language, the Scottish have Gaelic, but most people speak English in most of those places because of colonization. But the Welsh have done a lot more work to preserve their language. But what is the difference between them? See, as African people, what would we say is the difference between the Scottish, the English, and the Welsh? The differences are insignificant in general scheme of things. You know, if you're talking about politics from a political point of view, what's the difference? The differences are insignificant. So yes, there's a bit of a language difference. Yes, there may be a little bit of cultural differences. Yes, the houses may look slightly different. Brickwork might be slightly different, and all those kind of soft things, you know, slight differences in foods and tastes. But fundamentally, they're the same people. And in Africa, we have similar issues where we've made it, sometimes we can make it such a big deal, but actually people who want to divide us make it into a bigger deal. So we end up using this to say, oh, we can't unite as a people because of these differences, when these differences are insignificant. And also a question for you as well, when we talk about Africa uniting, Europe has a history of war for hundreds of years. This is a fact, look it up. But Europe united and created the European Union. And it's only the first major country to leave the European Union, which will be Britain at the end of this year. But European Union united with different languages, different cultures, and a history of war and antagonism, a long history of war and antagonism. And they managed to unite politically, economically, and in many other ways. So why is it that we think Africa can't unite when we don't have a history of war? Most of the wars in Africa are internal contradictions, not between borders. If you think about it, I'm not saying there's not ethnic conflicts, but if you look at the war in Africa, predominantly it's internal contradictions. It's not between countries. How many wars has there been between Ghana and Nigeria and the Congo or whatever? There are border issues and there are contradictions around there, but predominantly they're internal. But in Europe, there's been war between European countries for years and years and years. So it's a big difference. So let's have a look at, we're going to move on. So there's civil war as well internally in 1990 to 94. There was contradictions as well, and it led up to the massive genocide just before 1993. And there were evidence that genocide was being planned, and I'll demonstrate that shortly. So, yes, so the president that was in power in 1994, his plane was shot down on the evening of April 6th. And over the next 100 days, from April 6th to July 16th, okay, so this is literally today. This is July 16th, isn't it, today? So it's quite interesting. Literally 26 years ago today, all right? About 1 million Tutsis and some moderate Hutus were slaughtered in the Rwandan genocide. So that's the official genocide. And there's different estimates of how many people were killed. The official government of Rwanda figure of those killed is over 1 million. This is from their own data. And they say 93.7% were Tutsis. Between 250 and 500,000 women were raped. Now, this Some of these things I'm going to say are quite horrific, but also think about the consequences for future generations. When you got that number of women raped, that means some of these people would have obviously had children. Some of these women would have had children. Up to 20,000 children were born to these women as a result of the rape. So that's 20,000 children born out of rape, massive numbers. So think of the trauma for the children, the trauma for the women, the trauma for that community. Okay, so it's a really serious thing. And you see in so many societies, not just Africa, but all around the world, men use rape as an act of war. Yeah, they use it to terrorize people. It's a form of cruelty, wickedness, power, and also part of this thing of, you know, knowing women will be made pregnant as a result of it. So it's quite a sick behavior, and it cannot be acceptable in any shape or form. More than 67% of the women who were raped, that's more than half, during the genocide were infected with HIV and AIDS. So you've got a double problem. So you've got enough that the fact you were raped, then you add on to it that you might have got pregnant and had a child, and then also HIV and AIDS as well. So you can see this is such a crisis in a society. 50,000 widows, 75,000 orphans. So all these children with no family. And you think 26 years ago, so if these children were like 4 or 5 years old then, they're only in their 30s now. So that trauma is still living with people. Those people who were orphaned, as I said, are just young. The people who were raped, they're still alive, most of them. So the trauma is still very much a reality in Rwanda, and they have to deal with it head on. Between its establishment in 1994 and its closure in 2005, so this was the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. Now, be very careful. I didn't go into when we did South Africa, I didn't really go into the tribunal, the Truth and Reconciliation Tribunal in South Africa, because it's a sham, it's a joke, it's an embarrassment to Africans. I don't know how Mandela or any of them could have ever agreed to it, because it's interesting that Mandela got massive praise for forgiving his, what do you call it? Maybe we don't call it enemy, but forgiving the white South Africans for what they did to him and his people, because he wanted to move on, and he was almost given sainthood status. Now, if we compare this to Israel and Hitler and the Nazis of what they did, nobody criticizes Israel for chasing down 90-year-old, 100-year-old, don't care how old they are. Any Nazis around the world that are found anywhere in the world have to go to jail or have to go to court. And nobody criticizes Israel for doing this. But yet with Africans, we're expected to forgive and forget. And also we treat the victim and the perpetrator exactly the same, which is unbelievable. So when we talk about international criminal tribunals, this was actually, as it says, this is what the West, they put £2 billion. And over that period of time, so what we're talking about 11 years, over 11 years, only 61 people were sentenced. Yeah, and only 93 people indicted. It's a joke. 11 years, and that's all the people you indicted. Absolute sham. So what Rwanda did is they created their own community-based courts. Yeah, and those community-based courts are called, I'm not sure I can pronounce it right, Gakaka courts. So these courts, in a much shorter period of time, within 7 years, had 12,000 community-based courts and tried 1.2 million cases. You see the difference? So $2 billion and nonsense is going on, probably corruption, and God knows what was going on with that situation, but it's absolute sham organized by the West. Nothing going on. 60 people. I mean, come on. 60 people and 93 people gone on trial. I mean, it's a joke. 12,000 courts and 1.2 million people within 7 years. This is the story of Rwanda I'm going to give you tonight. A story of fantastic leadership, in my opinion, in that things can be done by the people, and it's not about money. Money is important, but this demonstrates that with $2 billion, hardly anything was done. And with very little money, I don't know how much this cost because I haven't got a price for it, but I'm sure it wasn't anywhere near $2 billion, because Rwanda doesn't have that kind of money anyway. The people could organize themselves and do community-based justice. 1 million people. How long would it take to try 1 million people in England? So it's a phenomenal story. Now let's look at the post-genocide stories, because Rwanda has a long history and genocide is only part of it. And the country is torn by it because it is in its recent past and in living memory. But we need to move beyond it. So let's look at what they've done. The government has pursued reconciliation, confession, and forgiveness. Now, one of the things with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, it's a different context. Now, in South Africa, what you had was the Truth and Reconciliation tribunals meant that all the APLA, all the Inkuntu Sizwe, all of the military of the armed wing of the African organizations would have to confess what they did and seek forgiveness. And the Europeans, who were the settlers, could also confess what they did and seek forgiveness. Now, the issue that so many people had, including Winnie Mandela refused to go to this, participate in it, and so did many of them out of principle, and I think they were right, is that the big criticism in South Africa was that the white oppressors and the perpetrators were seen as the same as the victims. So we who had to fight for our freedom, we who may have had to do things that in a normal situation you wouldn't have done, had to repent and kind of confess things in the same context as Europeans who were doing genocide against us. And that was what people said was wrong about it. Why do we have to forgive? And also they said, if you didn't, you could be tried. How many white people do you think were tried in South Africa? I reckon it was less than one. None. Because even the Botha, the previous prime minister, white prime minister of South Africa, refused, said he's not going to the tribunal, and he was never prosecuted, never charged with a single crime. And just like in Zimbabwe, not one white person was charged with anything. And the thing to recognize here is, when has there ever been a history of revenge in Africa? When have we ever committed revenge on white people? See, this is one of the delusional points that people say, oh yeah, but there could have been a backlash in South Africa and there could have been revenge if Mandela didn't agree and this and that. It's all nonsense, because there's no history of us taking any action against Europeans after we had our liberation. There's no history anywhere where there's been mass killings or mass attacks on Europeans. There's never been any. But anyway, in Rwanda, it's a very different context, because it was Rwandans killing Rwandans. So now you need reconciliation, because the people who committed the genocide and the people who survived the genocide still have to live together. Because what are you going to do? Put 1 million people in prison? How much is that going to cost to put one? Can you imagine how much housing you would need to put 1 million people in prison? So you block up the whole country for years and years and years and eat up loads of resources having all these people in prison. It just cripple your society. So they had to decide, we're going to have to forgive the people who didn't lead it. Those who led it would have to get prosecuted in prison. So the leaders, the political leaders, but just the general population who got caught up in it, if you don't find a way to reconcile and confess and forgive, then you're never going to move on. So they gave the opportunity to random people to confess and people to try and forgive them for what they did, because these people still have to live side by side in the community. And the only way you can do this is with confession and forgiveness. And there's been a lot of work done in Rwanda around this whole reconciliation, and people are still struggling with it because it's not easy. If your next door neighbor killed your parents and then your next door neighbor confesses to that and says, I want forgiveness, it's a very difficult for you as the children of that, your parents are being massacred, to say you're going to forgive them. I'm not saying this is easy, but what is the alternative? The alternative is I commit genocide against that family and we just have war forever because we just commit, you know, attacks against each other, and it just keeps going on and on and on forever. So at some point you have to accept that, you know, we have to move on. And I think Rwanda has taken the right direction by making that decision.
So just on that point, Asari, we've got a question. Can you see the questions on the screen?
No.
Well, Althea Williams, she asks, how did rape get introduced, and does this happen elsewhere in Africa as a weapon? She knows it happened in the Congo.
Yeah. basically virtually every war around the world where the soldiers engage with the population, rape is a very, very common act of war. Very, very common act of war all over the world. You'll see in Vietnam, you'll have mixed race children in Vietnam who were from Europeans and from Africans, soldiers that were in Vietnam. Anywhere in the world, you'll have relationships, because if people occupy for a period of time, there'll be consensual relationships. But this is a genocide, and it's very common in war. Very common, as you said, in the Congo. Very common in other parts of the world. It's not unique to Africa. It's very common behavior, which is sad, but it is very common. Yes. Any other questions?
No.
Okay. So this whole thing of social cohesion, justice, and development, as I said, if the country bogged itself down in the whole genocide situation and didn't have a reconciliation, the country would just be crippled by people wanting revenge and people, fighting back, and the whole situation. And also, if you know you're going to get revenge, or you're going to have revenge against you, there's no incentive for you to admit anything. There's no incentive for you to move forward. So hostilities and anger will stay forever. And you can see how this will just tear the country apart, and there'll always be another opportunity for another war and another fight. So this is why it's so important that we've got, how I understand, Rwanda has to move beyond that. And they've done a lot of work to do it, to build trust in communities, social cohesion, peace and harmony. Is really, really important. And they've done a lot of work around this. So they create what they call a new national narrative around the whole genocide. Now, the reason why I'm not spending, as I said, a lot of time on it, because Rwanda is a very modern country, in the sense that the story of Rwanda is very much post-genocide and pre-genocide, not dependence and pre-independence. It's much more post-genocide, because the story of Rwanda is a remarkable story of 26 years of development. It's more remarkable because of the context in which they came out of. But when you understand this story, you can see how they've achieved so much. This is just a picture from a building. If you were in Kigali Heights, which is a really nice modern office block and retail park, and when you're sitting on the top of it, you can see these gardens, that roundabout there, which is mainly car free, and it only lets in certain cars to get in access to that convention center. So at the back there, it looks like the mayor's office in London. I'd be surprised if it wasn't modeled on it. If anybody's been to the mayor of London's office in London Bridge on the river, it looks just like that. But at night, it's lit up. I'll show you a picture later when it's lit up at night. It's a beautiful landmark. And it looks very much, and it's about the same size as the mayor's office in central London. And next to it, that's the Radisson Blu Hotel. So this is a world-class convention center. So that's the hotel accommodation is Radisson Blu on the right. And on the left is the convention center. It's massive square footage of conference center. It can hold thousands of people. It can do smaller rooms. It can do exhibitions, because Rwanda sees itself as positioning itself as the leader in conference and venues in Africa. And I'll come back to that a bit later. All right. So that's the view, Kigali Heights, right in the center of or major part of Kigali city. And this is the beauty of Rwanda. Everywhere you go, it looks like this. This is not just one place. This is like, if you was in Hyde Park or somewhere, you think, oh, well, the whole of London doesn't look like this. The whole of Kigali looks like this. So I'll show you some more pictures in a minute. Let's look at some of the successes, why I say this is such a good case study. Most information in human development in the world. I'll say that again. Most improvement in human development in the world. The Human Development Index. That's major. We're not saying the most improved in East Africa. We're not saying the most improved in Africa. We're not saying the most improved in the third world. The most improved, period. The first for government transparency in Africa, number one. Number one for women in parliament. 67% of parliamentarians are women. That is the highest in the world. Nowhere else in the world we're near 50% women in parliament. Look at Britain. Britain has only recently had larger numbers since Labour came into power in 97, when there was the first 100+ women in parliament in 1997. Britain has had a parliament for hundreds of years. Remember, women didn't even have the vote at the beginning of the last century, let alone the large numbers in parliament. And there's all sorts of excuses made why it can't happen. And Rwanda put it in their constitution. When they came from 1994, they had a new constitution. See, because maybe I should give a little bit more context. The RPF is the party led by Paul Kagame. Now, it wasn't led then. He was the military leader when they took control of the country in 94 and stopped the genocide. After the genocide, the president of the country was another person. And that other person, the party sacked that person and asked Paul Kagame to become the president. And that's how he became the president in 1994. He did not take power after being the military leader. He didn't see himself as being a political leader necessarily. So we also have to understand that context. We also have to understand that Rwanda was liberated through armed struggle. It wasn't a typical post-colonial nation where the West decided who was in government, how the elections were going to be done, and so on. Rwanda liberated itself and created their own constitution. And that first constitution said 35% of parliament should be women. So they already set the bar high from day one. 35% need to be women. But their commitment to women in Rwanda is phenomenally high. In every aspect of life that I can see, women are promoted and expected to be a full part of the nation and in society. And they don't just say it, they're doing it. Because loads of societies say it. Everywhere in the world you go, they're going to say, yes, women, apart from Saudi Arabia or somewhere, everywhere says women should be part of society. So a lot of hot air, but we don't see evidence. In Rwanda, you see the evidence. And 50% of the cabinet, which is the ministers in the government, are women as well. So again, putting your money where your mouth is. Second fastest growing economy in Africa. Obviously, this is all changed since COVID. I don't know what the figures are since COVID because we're waiting to see what impact it will have on Africa. The reports I've seen is that the African economy will drop by 3% this year. That's what perspective is I've got so far. But it's still very early days because COVID is still kind of around, and most countries in Africa would have gone in recession, or in the world have gone into recession, which is 1/4 of where the economy has dropped. And it's expected to be maybe in recession for a while. So it's still early days, but it was the second fastest growing economy in Africa. Next week, we're doing Ethiopia was the number 1. 7.5 GDP since 2007. So that's over 10 years of consistent high growth. The West would die for a growth of over 5%. Over most countries, over 2% they would die for, let alone 7.5. But I do accept it's 7.5 from a low base, because we're talking about countries that Rwanda has got a very small economy relative to the West and the other parts of the world. But still, doesn't matter what size your economy, you want fast growth. Otherwise, you'll never, if you don't sustain 5+% growth, nearer to 7 to 10% growth, your country will take forever to develop. China sustained over 7% growth for over 30 years. That's why they're where they are now. If Rwanda could do that for 30 years, it will be like Singapore. And Singapore has done similar things. So, second easiest place to do business in Africa. 5th safest country to walk at night worldwide. Worldwide. 5th safest country. Now, there's 200 countries in the world. Rwanda is the 5th safest country in the world to walk at night. And I'm telling you, we could walk at night. We felt totally safe there. I'm walking at any time of night. And also, of course, Michelle was with me as well. And she felt very safe walking anywhere at night. There's police all around at night and in the day with machine guns. Yes, they do have machine guns on them, but they're there protecting you. They don't really interact much with you. They just stand mostly on their own as well. They're not walking like they do in some societies. We're holding them up against the wall and all that kind of stuff. They're just there to protect society and to make sure it's safe. And you get searched going into all the major buildings. Every hotel, every time we went to our hotel, we got searched. And all our stuff had to go through the detector machine. Every single time we went into the hotel, they did it. Every time we went into a major premises, retail, supermarkets, they did the same, every single place. So it's very safe. And I asked them why it's so much like that, and they said there was a little period a year or so ago where there was some small terrorist actions, insurgencies from Uganda. We may come to that discussion a bit later. Lowest debt region. So there's some big issues here. Third in Africa for meeting incentives, conferences and exhibitions, up 18 places in 3 years, because Rwanda, as I told you before, is positioning itself as the #1 location for events. And the Commonwealth Heads of State meeting was going to be in Rwanda in June, but it was cancelled because of COVID, and they're still looking to have it later this year in Rwanda. They have a growing bilingual educated workforce. Now, the colonial language in Rwanda was predominantly French, and the current leadership changed it to English because they felt that it was better integration into East Africa, because most of the East African countries do business in English, and they felt that doing business in French was a disadvantage. So they decided for better regional integration, they would have English as their first language of colonial language and the first language of business. And key Rwanda is their own language. So everybody speaks that basically in the country. Every Rwandan speaks it in the country. And predominantly the older people speak French and the younger people all speak English. That's predominantly what you see. Apart from obviously the more educated older people and the business people, they'll speak English as well. But if you go to a taxi, for example, and it's an older man, they'll speak French and not very little English at all. Now, the reason why I mentioned 50,000 graduates, because it's a large number, because they really believe in an educated workforce and in large numbers, because they believe that the future of Rwanda is through education and high technology, high science, and a high level of education. That's what they believe, because Rwanda doesn't have a load of resources and it's a small country anyway. So they think the future is through education is a major part. First in the world for network readiness. This is around technology now. Second in the world for ICT promotion. 95% 4G network coverage, 7,000 kilometers of fiber network, which is high-speed cable. Now, let's look at this period from 95 to 2018. We're going to compare West Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, sorry, to Rwanda, right? So let's have a look at this. The average life expectancy in Sub-Saharan Africa, and the reason why I don't like these terms Sub-Saharan Africa, but we understand why we use them, because predominantly Africans, people of African origin, the Nubian people, predominantly south of the Sahara. We know North Africa is predominantly Arabic and Arab peoples. There are large numbers of Africans, but it's predominantly Arab people. So when we say Sub-Saharan Africa, you get a better comparison as to what we're talking about. So what is the life expectancy? Sub-Saharan Africa, 61.2 years. What is it in Rwanda? 68 years. And remember, this is from life expectancy of 31 years just after the genocide. Absolutely unbelievable what they've achieved in that time. Expected years in school, on average, 10 years across Sub-Saharan Africa. Again, life expectancy years in school in Rwanda is over 11 years now. Remember, you start school at 5, most people finish at 6. So you're talking about a full period of school. If you was in Britain, you'd be in school from 5 till 18. All right, but you can leave school at 16. But if you're not working, you stay in school till you're 18 in the UK. So that's what, 13 years. Per capita, not high. Look at this per capita. So it's much lower than West Africa. This is significant as well. Sorry, than Sub-Saharan Africa. The Sub-Saharan Africa average is nearly $3,500 per person. That's the total spending of in the economy across the whole of the country. Average just under $3,500. In Rwanda, it's just under $2,000. So it's a lot lower, and also a smaller population. So not only it's lower, it's small population. So that's why I'm saying Rwanda, relatively speaking, is quite a poor nation. But if you look at it from where it was to where it is now, it's nearly tripled in terms of what they wanted to become. They want to be a middle-income country. They wanted to be a middle-income country by 2020. So that's been extended to 2025, I think it is now. Now, we mentioned before about the Pan-African credentials of countries, and I've not been that positive about the Pan-African credentials of most of the countries we've spoken about so far, with the exception of Ghana under Nkrumah. Now, Have a note of this, the African Continental Free Trade Area. You should know what this is. And it's basically was part of Nkrumah's vision to have an integrated economic market in Africa. Now, it was agreed under the leadership of Paul Kagame. You'll see him right in the middle, next to the Nigerian president in white, in the white gown here, African gown here. So to his left is Paul Kagame, right in the middle, who was the host. You can see it was in Kigali, Rwanda, because he was chair of the African Union when African heads of state agreed in March 2018 to integrate Africa into one continental trade area, making it the biggest in population size, biggest market in the world, trade market in the world for population, 1.2 billion people. And at about a $3 trillion economy is Africa. So about the size of India's economy with about the same population. So here we go. It was signed in Kigali in Rwanda, March 2018. 55 countries, single market of 1.2 billion people within a combined economy of 2.5 trillion. Some say 3 trillion. I've had different figures from different people, but nobody goes lower than $2.5 trillion, which, as I said, is about the size or just under the size of India's economy. And loads of people praise India for having a very big economy relative to where it was before. So it just shows Africa, if it was united, is already a force to be reckoned with, let alone what would happen if we really agree. So they want to remove at least 90% of tariffs on goods across Africa. So that means that there'll be no extra taxes on goods passed and sold between African countries. Kagame's made loads of speeches. Go on YouTube, you'll see loads of speeches of Paul Kagame's speeches in English as well as in Rwanda. And look at those speeches. You can listen to those speeches in English where he constantly talks about Africa, talks about Rwanda, and always talks about Africa as well. And this is one of my criticisms of a lot of leadership in Africa. They just talk about their own country. They don't talk about Africa as a whole, just like in the Caribbean, where people talk about Jamaica, Dominica, Barbados, not the Caribbean. And if you look at the future of Africa, the only future for Africa is if we unite and we become one trading power, we become one political force in Africa. So it's really interesting that there's constant talk about Africa and constantly talking to his own population about being African, and African people should have their own way. We should have our own direction, constantly making reference to being African. So President Kagame right now is the chair of the East African Community. Rwanda received, see, this is again the difference between talking and not talking, okay? There's loads of people who've got very excited in Britain about what's been going on in Libya. So Gaddafi, when Gaddafi was in power, he gave a lot of refuge to Africans to live in Rwanda peacefully. Now, as soon as Gaddafi was removed, a lot of those Africans were brutalized, beaten, and all kinds of wickedness was done. And there's been talk about slavery coming back in Libya since Gaddafi was removed, because it's chaos in Libya right now. And loads of people have jumped up and down about it. It's outrageous, this, that, and the other. What African countries have you heard have done much about it? What have they done? What have they offered to do? Now, this was interesting. When I was there, this is what was on the papers, and I know it's happened because I've seen it since. Rwanda has received, because I was there in September, so I know, they received the first of 566 asylum seekers from Libya to be resettled in Rwanda, paid for by the Rwandan government, because they see the Africans in Libya as being Africans that we should look after. So that and remember, I told you, Rwanda is not wealthy, but Rwanda still made this gesture. It's a massive gesture to house people and look after them, and have told the people in Rwanda why they're there and why you should respect them. Now, one of the contradictions that constantly get raised with me is the Congo and Uganda. And I don't know the answer to these questions, but I do know that the exiles, now this is important context. When the genocide happened, that some of the people who were the most responsible for the genocide fled to Uganda and Congo. Now, the question I would ask you is, if you was the president of Rwanda and the people who created the genocide moved to Uganda and the Congo, and the people in the Congo and Uganda did not put them on trial, did not send them back to be put on trial, and gave them protection. And these people sometimes come back into your country and create trouble, political trouble, military trouble, creating killings, bombing, and all kinds of confusion. What would you do about it? You see, because we can sit in our armchairs and philosophize and be moral about all kinds of stuff. Okay. Now, Jesse Jackson once said, and I'm not a great fan of Jesse Jackson, but Jesse Jackson once said that to have morals, you have to be middle class. Because when you have a nice job, a nice house, a nice car, and everything in life is lovely, it's easy to be very, very moral. I'm going to try and log in from my other one now as well. It's easy to be moral when you have all those things. Now, when bullets are hitting your house and there's incursions on your border, which is what happened, was basically, as I said, the people who committed the genocide were the people who were on the border of the Congo and Uganda, have been living there all this time. And they have made it very clear they want to come back, and they've made it very clear they're looking to overthrow the current government. Now, what would you do in that situation if you're faced with that reality, that the current government is being challenged by people outside saying that they're looking to overthrow you and they're looking to have incursions into your country? You're going to have to take action. And it's not always enough to take action by just putting people on your border. Sometimes you have to go into the country and take action yourself, even though there's an agreement not to go into each other's countries. But if the other country isn't going to sort it out, what happens is Rwanda sent troops into Uganda and the Congo to sort it out. And I know a lot of people have been angry about that, but that's my interpretation of it. And I think, well, if they're not sorting it out, because Uganda hasn't got a great government and Congo's in a crisis situation, it's not in a great situation either. Let's go to the next slide. Let's look a little bit more about these Pan-African credentials. We'll move to the next one. So if you look at, these are some quotes. Okay, some quotes here. Governance and prosperity of Africa cannot be outsourced. This is quotes from Kagame himself. Pan-African collaboration is key to success. The actions of African countries should always be fully aligned with the ideals of Africa's unity. We are not where we want to be, but we are on a journey. And there's a Pan-African network of 6 centers of excellence across Africa, and including Rwanda in mathematical sciences. So one of the big things is agreements between African countries is to make science more important and excelling in science, because we don't want to be behind the technology revolutions. So what you have then is you have Africa's research center in quantum science is based in will be based in Kigali. So that just gives an example. And the African Leadership University, one of the experience I had when I was there in Rwanda was the interesting situation where we were talking to somebody having a little bite to eat or whatever it was. And they said, did you know there was an African Leadership University in Rwanda? And I said, what? Where? He said, upstairs. He said, do you want to go? And I kind of saw it as a rhetorical question. So what do you mean, do I want to go? This is something I dreamed about for years, to have African Leadership University in Africa. And they've actually got one in Rwanda. It started in Ghana from a Ghanaian brother, who then moved it to Rwanda. So next slide, you'll see a picture of the sign. When we went there, we took a picture. So you'll see a little picture of it. So have a look. I think there's one. Oh, it might be after that. It might be the one after the education. So I'll show it to you in a minute. So this is just, we're going to go into some particular areas of government. And in those areas of government, I will show you some pictures and I'll give a little bit of text as well. So you can go to the next one, education. The picture with the pictures. So 68% literacy for 15-year-olds. So it's still some way to go, okay? Because it's not 100%, 68%, but it's much higher than it was. As I said before, 12 years of basic education. And schooling is free up to upper secondary, all right, since 2012. Now, there's many African countries where it's not free yet, and they've been independent a lot longer than since the genocide. Exceptionally high gross enrollment ratios. So it's high levels of enrollment in school, but one of the problems that Rwanda has, they admit, is only 68% finish. So what happens is they're dropping off over the years. So there could be a number of reasons for this: poverty and reasons like that, because the main reason children drop out of school is because of social problems. Yeah, because their families struggling with poverty, and they want their children to go and work or help the family and help the elderly, that kind of thing. And then there's a bit of pressure on them not to go to school, or they live in a little bit more of an isolated area and they find it hard to reach there. So these are the kind of things that create a problem. So I'm also going to try and see if I can get back in through the other route. So more data. The amount of university students, I told you before, is a high level of university students in the country. They've had more and more universities opening in high-tech colleges. They're very strong on IT and technical side of stuff. All the sort of technology resource-based. Digital library. There's a digital library across Africa. I didn't even know that. So that's Rwanda brought into that as well, the African Virtual University. And they really do believe in building human capital because they think that's the future of Rwanda. Next slide, please. So there's the picture when we were inside the African Leadership University Rwanda campus. So it's run by the students, by the way, ALU. One of my bucket list aims is to teach there one day. And I'm hoping that the next time I go, I'm going to be able to do some talks there or something there anyway. It's absolutely fantastic. So next one. And by the way, all the rooms are named after different countries. So one room's called Nigeria, another room's called Ghana, another room's called Morocco, etc. So the rooms, it's very Pan-African. Right, let's show you some of these. What happened to the education pictures? Let's just go back. There must have been an education picture we missed. Let's go back a couple. I want to show you these pictures because these are all contextual. Go back another one. Bit more back. Bit more. Oh, there you go. So top left, Rwanda had a policy of 1 laptop per child. So they had these. They did a deal with American technology guru who managed to get laptops for $99. So Rwanda bought a whole bunch of them. And we're putting them in every school. They wanted every child to have access to a laptop. Of course, they couldn't afford like a £500 laptop per person. So they had these cheaper laptops that they imported. And the government minister that was behind it apparently was a little bit corrupt. And that minister has been removed and put into exile. They do not mess when it comes to corruption. You can see the amount of graduates, top right. That's just a symbol of the amount of graduates in Rwanda. Bottom left, you see the school system in Rwanda. Just a primary school there, and the community schools on the bottom left and right. Some of the stuff that they're doing there. The adult education is on the bottom right. So this is just an example of education in Rwanda right now. So they're going from trying to bring in technology for children from a young age to get used to the internet and all the modern technology, right the way through to adult education. So let's skip forward. We're going to talk about healthcare now. And these are major challenges for Africa. Education and healthcare is still a major challenge for Africa, where most African countries, we'll go back to the picture, most African countries still haven't dealt with this contradictions of healthcare and education, which you could say are the most basic human rights. If we go back one, we'll just get the one on, yeah, that's the one. So top left is the community healthcare, because primary care is the most important in any country. If you don't have good primary care, you always will have problems with what they call secondary care, which is hospital care. So you see some of the advanced facilities they have in the right and on the right hand side. And look at this one on the left hand side, bottom left, that's a drone. Now what Rwanda has is a lot of hills. They call it the land of 100 hills or 1,000 hills or something. And it's a very, very hilly. If you're in Rwanda, in Kigali, you'll see how hilly it is just there alone. So it's very hilly. So it takes a long time to travel between places unless you're flying. So what Rwanda did is they did a joint venture or a relationship with a private company, and they got drones to fly blood and other things into the rural areas, so they could have transfusions and people wouldn't die because it takes too long to get there. So you could fly. Might take you, I don't know, half an hour or something, or you could drive, take you 3 hours. So you could see how the problem you would have if you have the major hospitals in the center And then people who live in the rural areas just basically die because healthcare takes too long to get there. And I understand that Ghana has copied this and taken it to a whole new level. So Ghana has done it big scale, because I talked to one of the people in the government, in one of the civil servants in Ghana when I was doing some training earlier this year, and they told me that it's massive in Ghana right now. And they took the idea from Rwanda. They went to Rwanda and saw how they did it, and they've taken it there. I'm sure other African countries may do the same. So it's just using modern technology to solve problems in Africa. So it's a fantastic example. Right, next slide. Go back one. So under healthcare, near universal healthcare from a low-cost compulsory insurance system. Now, again, you see, many of us who grew up with left-leaning politics would say that healthcare should be free to everybody. You see, this is, again, armchair idealism, I would describe it as. Because what if your country isn't rich enough to pay for healthcare for everybody? What do? See, this is what I mean by having morality that isn't based in the reality of the challenges that Africa often has. So if your country is not wealthy enough to just give healthcare to everybody, then what's the alternative? The alternative is there has to be some kind of insurance system. In fact, there's very few countries in the world that, compared to England, by you have a tax system, and national insurance is supposed to be the tax system, but that's long been a nonsense in Britain anyway, because basically everybody gets free healthcare in Britain, whether you pay national insurance or not. It's not really relevant to that. So the idea is that taxation is taken at source, and that covers the National Health Service in Britain. So it's free at the point of entry. But be careful, the National Health Service, the free part of the National Health Service is hospitals and GPs. Because in Britain, you pay, if you go to the pharmacy, it's about £9 per prescription, which is very expensive, because if you need 3 or 4 different tablets and you need those every week or whatever, that's starting to become very expensive, even if it's every month. So healthcare in Britain is not totally free. Pharmacies are not free, and dentists are predominantly private, and you have to pay. Unless you're a child under 18 or in full-time education or pensioner, you don't get free dental care in this country. And if you need secondary services, like if your back's hurting you and all that kind of stuff, you can get that treatment, but you have to wait a very long time to get treated in England. Otherwise, you've got to go private again. So it's not completely free in Britain. It's predominantly free with the GP, as I said, and the hospital. So which is the major cost. I do accept it's the major cost, because if you have a surgery and it costs £50,000, most people would never have that money, like in America. So healthcare is affordable in Rwanda. And as far as I'm concerned, the principle of everybody having access to healthcare should be the principle, not that it's free. Free is not a principle. I don't see any principle in things being free. The principle should be that everybody can have access to healthcare at an affordable price. To me, that is a principle. It doesn't have to be free, especially if people can afford it. Why is it free in Britain when people have money to be able to pay into a system to make it happen, at least, collectively? Anyway, next one. Let's look at some data on this. Pioneer, I told you about 90% coverage, because it's basically based on your income, and most people can afford to pay something towards it, and therefore they get covered. Pioneer, the performance-based financing, that's the basic system in Rwanda. They believe in performance management. Everything is performance-based financing. So if the private sector involved or the public sector involved, everything they do needs to be performance related, and they get paid based on performance. So it's very strongly good value, or what we used to call best value in Britain. Because I used to inspect councils, basically for 11 years. I inspected councils here, and I understand how this works. And it's basically looking at value for money with public money. They have a devolved system, so it's localized. Payments are based on a national system, so so everybody nationally pays, but it's devolved in terms of the way healthcare is. And as I said, it's based on income and vulnerability. So one of the only countries to provide universal eye care for all. Cuba gets so much praise for doing this. Rwanda, hardly a mention. In fact, I've not heard anybody mention it. I just knew about it because I read it somewhere and I thought I'd put it in here. Now, do you know how many people there are in the world, African people, who are going blind? And you see those adverts with the children where their eyelids go back in and they hurt their eyes to the point where they go blind. These can be cured for a penny, for what is it, £1 or whatever, with drops in their eyes and stuff can be cured, no problem. Access to clean water, etc. So for Rwanda to have universal eye care in 2018 is unbelievable, because most places in Africa, eye care is not free. So it's a problem. People just go blind because they haven't got access to basic care. The Mobilization Committee for Community-Based Health is, again, to encourage people to get access to healthcare and so on. 45,000 community health workers, 4 national hospitals, and loads of district hospitals, all to provide healthcare for the people. All right, let's go on to women. Women in Rwanda, you see the Women's Conference on the top left-hand side. There's lots of women are encouraged to participate in every aspect of community life. They have women's forums in the rural areas. They have the women's conferences. That women are in leading positions in society, ministers. You'll see on the bottom right, they're in the government, in the parliament. So all over the life of Rwanda, you'll see women in very prominent positions. Let me just give you a few examples. Next slide. Michelle did this for me, so she did the ones on women. When we do the presentations on Rwanda, because we were looking to do trips to Rwanda and we wanted to bring people back, so we developed some of these slides. So there you are, the head of Rwandan Development Board, which is the main structure that does all the development of the country and is leadership in investment and what countries should be invested in, bringing in internal, external investment. They got a record 2 billion investment last year into the country. And this chief executive officer of the Rwandan Development Board is this sister on the left called Claire. The High Commissioner for Rwanda in the UK is called Yamina, and she's a sister as well. The Minister of Gender and Family Promotion is the top right. And the first, I think, Rwandan pilot, who's of a woman, is also there as well, another picture. So it's just some examples, just to demonstrate in every aspect of life. The constitution, as I said, I said 35, it was 30% of all structures have to have women. So district councils as well as national. You've got 67%, that's wrong, of women, the highest in the world. 50% in parliament, one of the safest places in the world for women. Many of the top jobs, as I said before, 4 out of the 7 Supreme Court seats are women. So that's more than half. Some of the most women-friendly policies, as I've said before. Women can use land to get a loan. Now, this is quite an interesting issue. In many parts of Africa, the kind of patriarchal system that took over from the matriarchal system that Africa had, which patriarchal just means men-led rather than women-led. Now, one of the contradictions Nkrumah talked about when he was in power and he wrote about was that in Ghana, they had traditions. Now, you've got to remember, we have patriarchal traditions in Africa as well as matriarchal traditions. Now, some of them are backward. Now, one of them is land is distributed through men. Now, a lot of chiefs only distribute land through men. Now, hear the contradiction now. So, your husband dies and your chief says the land has to go back. You can no longer have the land because it was your husband's land. So he's died. And then what happens to you and your children? You're homeless. And also, you can't go to a bank and say, look, this is my land. Could you give me a loan? And I'll use this land as collateral. No, because you don't own it. So you can't use it as collateral. So you can't get a loan. And this traps a lot of rural people into poverty. Now, if you've ever heard of microloans, which was first thought about by the Nobel Prize winning leader in Bangladesh many, many years ago, he created the microfinance banks, where he lent very small sums of money. And when I say small, I mean like £5, £10, loans that you would think are crazy in England. Why am I going to borrow £10? But if you're living in a society where the average person only gets like a few £100 a month pay, or only £100 a month pay, then £10 is a lot of money. And you would need time to pay it back. But £10 can buy you a wheelbarrow. £10 can buy you some basic resources so you can take more food and sell more food into the street because you've got a wheelbarrow to take it, or you've got something, you can get a donkey or something. These things are very important. So women who can use their land to get a loan is very, very important to liberate women, because women who don't have opportunity to earn money independently often are enslaved by to their husbands and find themselves trapped into a problem where they can't help their children, they can't take their children to school and pay for education and healthcare because they don't have any income. Lots of women are trapped in that situation. So it's really important that we help our sisters to make sure that they got access to education and access to finance and jobs or self-employment. So they encourage girls to study. you know, traditional male subjects as well. That's another thing in Africa. You find that due to poverty and backward tradition, a lot of girls don't get to go to school in Africa because they put priority on the boys, because they, you know, because it's just sexism, basically. There's no basis for it. And so in a society where everybody can't go to school, boys tend to go to school more than girls. So we need to change this situation, because again, girls are more likely to become oppressed if they haven't got education and they haven't got access to finance. They have the women's network there as well. Safe places for women to spend time together and do vocational training. Next one, please. So the infrastructure, really important to mention. I've already mentioned the Kigali Arena. Sorry, the convention center at the bottom. Sorry. That's you see it lit up at night. It's a beautiful landmark at night. So the mayor's place in London doesn't light up like that at night. It looks beautiful. You'll see the top left. That's how everywhere in Rwanda it is. Everywhere I saw was like this, especially cities and the main centers, because I went out of Kigali. We went 3 hours out of Kigali, and every town we went to was looked like this. It didn't look as good as the capital, but it was very close to it. And modern buildings, the state buildings were all very modern buildings as well. The Kigali Arena was recently finished, and that is a world-class arena where they play basketball and other indoor sports. And then you have Kigali International Airport is where I landed with Rwandan Airlines. And it's a very modern airport, very small, and they're building a new, bigger airport that can take millions capacity slightly south of Kigali, where when that opens, the capacity will be huge, because tourism is another major feature that Rwanda is trying to expand on. Next one, please. Yeah, 83% live in rural areas, so it's still very rural. So even though you have a large population, I think it's nearly 1 million live in Kigali, most people still live in rural areas. So it's still low numbers. Look, only 34%. I was surprised by this, because everywhere I went had electricity. So the percentage of people without electricity is still quite high, and there's a lot of the countryside, therefore, doesn't have electricity. But they want 100% electrification in the next 4 years. There's still many parts of Africa that are much richer. You go to Nigeria, go to many countries in Africa, there's no electricity in so many places, and still have, you know, power cuts all the time and all sorts of problems. Excellent road network. I saw that all over. I said we drove three hours out of Kigali right up to the coast. Well, I say to the border, sorry, where the lake is, and the roads were excellent all the way up, not one pothole. I'm not saying there weren't potholes in roads. That's in the side roads in parts of Kigali that I did see those, but most of the major road networks are excellent, in excellent condition. And they have a vision. You know, it's immaculately clean and landscapes everywhere. There's no excuse for rubbish in Africa. If you go to African countries, you see rubbish all over the place. Rubbish not being collected, people throwing rubbish in the street, drains not being cleared, open drains all over the place, stinking, smelling, and that creates a lot of problems with healthcare, and why you have mosquitoes and problems like that. I didn't see one mosquito when I was in Rwanda. I was there a week, didn't see one mosquito. I stopped taking anything, and I just walked around in shorts and everything, never got one bite. And I believe it's because it's so clean. And as I said, they have a vision to make a technology hub and ICT innovation. They've got 4G wireless broadband network there across most of the country, and I'm sure they'll have 5G soon as well. Next one, please. Affordable housing is a big thing in Rwanda as well. When they're trying to build more and more housing, they have a big problem with housing. They want investors to come and to invest in housing in the country, but not just for the wealthy. They want social housing as well. And the quality of social housing is very high. When you see the properties, like these properties we see here, we see good quality homes. So the people will have good quality homes, because the old homes in the bottom right, you can see how close they are together without proper roads in between them and that. This is where you have poverty, sanitation issues, and lots of other issues. So they're slowly getting rid of more of those and building these. And when you in Rwanda, all I saw is most people had good quality roofing. And again, it must have been the government, because I don't believe everybody in Rwanda has got the money to have a good roof. So there must have been some sort of program to help people have decent roofs on their home. Because if you know anything about Africa, because of the warmth, in most parts of Africa, it's reasonably warm. And Rwanda's average temperature is around 26, 27, so it's not that hot. You know, if you have a decent roof, you're basically protected from most things. and then you try and put nets on the windows and stuff because of the mosquitoes and stuff like that. But basically, if you have a decent roof, you're basically part decent, okay? Because we know not everywhere in Africa has even got windows or, you know, proper housing. All right, next one. So, national housing policy, model village program, upgrading of villages. The Vision 2020 goal was to achieve 35% urbanization. So they're very clear. They want to urbanize the country and have a high level of urbanization, because urbanization is where you get fast growth, you get economic growth, and there's advantages of specialization and advantages of having things in dense areas. So it's a big stimulus to the economy for people to live in urban areas. And it doesn't mean you have to do urban areas where it's not green, it's not environmentally friendly, etc. And I'll come to that later. So don't believe it's just a concrete jungle, because everywhere in Rwanda is green and landscaped. So that you can have that balance. Okay. So the other bit is everyone, independent of income, based on subsistence and location, shall be able to access adequate housing in sustainably planned and developed areas reserved for habitation in Rwanda. So Rwanda is very, very tight for land. There's not much land because it's very hilly. So it's not much arable land. So they try and reserve land for farming and stuff, but they've got to also provide land for housing. So it's a fine balance. So they are looking for collaboration in finance and investment to provide social housing, affordable housing for the Rwandan people. Of course, if you're rich and you want to buy a house, you can do that. But they want to look after their people because they know the average income is very, very low. So the promotion of saving for housing as well. Okay, collaboration, as I said, for pooling, land pooling, so they can make use of the land. And they also want to strengthen the local construction industry. So they're encouraging local construction companies to be doing most of the building. So if you want to collaborate, the government will help you more if you collaborate with local. Yep, next one. Let's look at community. This is also very relevant because of the post-genocide situation. There's lots of community activity in Rwanda. There's an example of some community meetings. Next one. There's lots of slides. The Umuganda, I'm not sure I pronounce it, where community work, the last Saturday of the month. If you're able-bodied, you have to be involved in promoting peace, unity, and prosperity. And what it means is that everybody in the country goes and cleans and builds and does things to help the community. You knock on neighbors' doors, you ask if the old need help, disabled, etc. It's a day of community development. And even you see the president out doing stuff, digging wells or whatever it's they're doing. And it's an idea of bringing the people together to self-help, that we can do it ourselves. We're not waiting for aid. We're not waiting for a man on a magic white horse to come and help us. We can do it ourselves. And it creates a kind of concept in Rwanda of self-help. We can help ourselves. We can keep our own roads clean. We can keep our neighborhood clean. We can keep it tidy. We can do it ourselves. And we can look after our own community. And then they have the Garinka program, which is basically giving cows to poor families. Because if you give somebody a cow, they can have milk and they can, have some basic form of protein by having some milk into their lives. And also, I believe they're doing stuff around chickens as well. Because again, if you have chickens, you can have eggs, and that provides a form of protein as well. So again, this is where, in the West, you can have all vegan, vegetarian, and all these things. But again, if you want to have all this morality, it's all well and good. But if you're living in poverty and you can hardly eat, being a vegan or a vegetarian is you can't just go up to Sainsbury's and buy £100 worth of high quality organic food and vegan products and all the fantastic stuff you can get in the West. The reality is that when you're poor, you eat whatever's around you. This is why I say a lot of these things. I'm not criticizing anybody for doing this. I'm not criticizing anybody for being moral. I'm just saying morality has a price. It's easy to be moral when you have money. Okay, you can say I'm never going to eat meat when you've got money in your pocket and you can buy the alternative. But if you're going to starve to death if you don't eat meat, you got to eat some meat, or you eat whatever you can get your hands on. Okay, so that's why I mention these things. Over 120,000 households have been given the dairy cows, and that whole help. And they have the car-free day where they encourage people to exercise as well. These are great community initiatives. This is the environment. I just want to show you they've got some good environmental policies. Look at the size of this environment here. Look at this, how far you can see, and it's landscaped everywhere. Everywhere you can look, it's landscaped. It's taking care of your own community. And it shows you can do it even if you don't have money. There's no excuse. Why do we go to African countries where the place looks broke down? This was one of my big frustrations with governance in Africa and leadership. Why is the place broke down? Everybody says, oh, it's because we're poor. No, it's because of bad leadership. Because poor countries like Rwanda can shame you by showing you that you don't have to have money to look after your people. Next one, please. Some of the policies. Rwanda banned plastic bags in 2008. Don't bring a plastic bag if you're going to Rwanda. Do not bring any plastic bags into the country. You will get into trouble and you get prosecuted. Now, when is Britain going to ban plastic bags? This is 12 years ago. Rwanda banned plastic bags. What are they waiting for here? Just do it. Make a decision and do it. This is what I mean, the difference between talking and doing. Just do it. They can just ban plastic bags in Britain. We know plastic bags are not good for society. They're not good for land. They don't biodegrade. So if you go to a shop in Rwanda, you have biodegradable bags or you have paper bags. And they want to increase their forest cover to 30% of the total land area by 2020, which is now. The protection, they do believe in protection and restoration of areas, and they have a green fund where they've asked money from outside Africa and from around the world. And it's the largest in Africa. They've got $100 million green fund because they just ask countries to give them money to keep looking after the environment. So again, you don't need to be rich. You just need to have commitment. And as I said, they believe in national development should be in harmony with the environment and low carbon. Next one, please. Now, let's look at tourism. Now, top left is the Radisson Blu, which I mentioned before, which is the convention center next to the convention center. Most of the Europeans want to go and see the gorillas when they go to Rwanda. I didn't want to go and see any gorillas when I went to Rwanda. I've seen loads of gorillas. I don't want to see any more. When I go to Africa, I don't go to see animals. I go to see the people. Now, if I can see some animals as well, fine. Okay, if I got time for it. But it's not I'm not very fascinated by stuff like that. I don't want to go and see elephants and gorillas and stuff like that. I want to see the people. And this is one of the problems with Africa as well, is whenever they show Africa, they show wildlife. When they show Europe, they don't show wildlife, they show cities. So we need to show these pictures to you. This is one of the reasons why I've got so many pictures on here, so you can see how developed it is. The Ubumwe Grand Hotel is right in the heart of Kigali, and that's why we stayed there. The top right is the Ubumwe Grand Hotel, a Rwandan hotel, superb quality, superb standards, and that is an infinity pool on the roof. We swam in that pool on the roof, overlooking Kigali. And when you go on the other side, there's a rooftop terrace, and that rooftop terrace on the right hand side at the top is oversees Rwanda, Kigali, because it's high, and it's high up in the hotel, so you can oversee the rest of the city, and it's all open as well. It's just they've got the roof, the part of those sort of pillars on the top, because it can rain hard in Rwanda, so they have to cover it. But it's basically just open. There's no windows, and it's a superb quality hotel right in the center of Rwanda, and it's African owned. How many times do we ever see images of Africa looking like this? Now, what about the flights? When they booked the flights for us, they presumed wrongly that we didn't want to travel with Rwanda Air. Don't know why they thought that, because I did. And we said, no, change the flights. We want to travel with the national carrier because we want to be part of the whole African Rwandan experience. Why would we give our money to anybody else? And look at the flight, look at the planes, modern planes flying from London right the way through to Rwanda. They stopped off at Belgium, and then we flew over to Rwanda. Modern planes with digital technology. I watched films and everything just like any other flight, and I could choose all different things to watch when I was on the flight. So very modern airline, excellence, and I would fly with them every time. So tourism is worth 400 million annually. And if you notice, if you look at the shirts of the Arsenal football team, if you look at the left-hand side of their shirts, it says Visit Rwanda, because they sponsored Arsenal Football Club to promote tourism in Rwanda, and they got some criticism for that. And I won't surprise you by saying Paul Kagame supports Arsenal, by the way. So it's no surprise they picked them. But then Arsenal is a major team in London, and it has lots of wealthy people who go to watch it. And there's millions of people around the world who watch sport and watch football in particular, and will see those shirts with Visit Rwanda on it, and it encouraged tourism into the country. So I think it was an investment worth doing. I only believe it was about 10 million anyway. So if tourism is worth nearly $500 million, it's a drop in the ocean anyway. So they do position themselves as a tourist destination and position Kigali as the #1 conference destination. It's currently number 3. The major sites are Lake Kivu, as I mentioned before, the national park, and the volcanic national park as well. They're the major sites. We've been to Lake Kivu. We haven't been to the other 2. Next time, maybe we'll visit the others as well. But as I said, I don't really go to see wildlife. I go there to see the people. Kigali Genocide Memorial is definitely worth seeing because it is a powerful reminder of the cruelty of human beings. But when you go to the Kigali Genocide Memorial, it's not just Rwanda. They actually have the Nazis, they have Pol Pot in Cambodia, and they also have the genocide that was in the East Africa, the Eastern European country. I forgot what it's called. I forgot where it's called now. Croatia, is it? Around that area there, they had the massacre as well. So they don't just show Rwanda. It's mainly about Rwanda, and it tells you the whole history of it. You need about an hour minimum just to go around and read and take it all in. And it's very emotional. It's a very, very powerful memorial, but very respectful. And they have the peace gardens outside. A lot of people go outside and just take a quiet moment. And remember, a lot of Rwandans visit it, and they need a quiet moment because it's their people actually buried right there. And you see the bones, you see the massacres, you see a lot of pictures there. It's very, very traumatic to see. But it's not something you can't take most people to, even children. But it's still quite graphic in some situations. And as I said before, they're building a new airport, and they've got the Rwanda Air Fleet. Let's keep going. Business and the economy. So you'll see Invest in Rwanda. There's a big push that's from the Rwandan Development Board. You see on the left, they're processing pineapple there for juices and food and fruit. On the left-hand side, you see a picture of Kigali, which is the capital. And it's a very, very modern, bustling city where you'll see lots of traffic, and you see all the development, the shops, the retail, the office accommodation, the hotels, everything's very, very modern. Every time you go, I bet you when I go back, it'll be new again. And if you see the bottom right, yes, VW is in Rwanda, and they make and build cars in Rwanda. And yep, so, and you can get, there's a taxi, like an Uber system that you can get on your mobile phone, and you can use VW cars, mostly Polos, small cars to drive you about. But they also have the Passats as well. We had one take us to the airport when we were leaving in the Passat. Next one, please. So the first mobile phone, smartphones to be made in Africa, Maraphones, is an Indian investor who's set up in Rwanda, and it's produced and manufactured in Africa. The first mobile phones to be made in Africa. So again, they want to encourage technology. Amazing. Maybe that's the next phone I'm going to have to buy. I'm going to have to see if I can get hold of one of them so we can buy an African phone. Next one, please. This is made in Rwanda. This is a policy, official policy in Rwanda, to be made in Rwanda, by Rwandan, made in Rwanda. Bottom left, Michelle's actually got a pair of those sandals. We've met these sisters who own it, and we're looking to build a relationship with them. And Michelle's looking to potentially, she might do some imports of these into the UK and help them get into the UK market. Bottom right, similarly, she's working with one of the coffee producers there to see if we can get these into the UK as well. And top right, you can see the production. The Rwandans are making the cars. It's not Germans coming into the country making the cars. They're Rwandans making the cars. So we're developing the science and technology and the capacity. And maybe one day we'll have our own car. And in the top left, they really encourage the creative market. That's the clothes. They make clothes in Rwanda, and they encourage that whole creativity around the arts and the whole creative sector to develop as well. So very, very interesting when you're there, the shops and stuff. And we always ask who owns it. Most of them Rwandan owned. Next one. Coffee shops, lots of coffee shops. Coffee is a big feature in Rwanda, and I only showed the Rwandan ones. So I checked as well, did my research to make sure they're owned by Rwandans. So you got Bourbon Coffee there. You got the other coffee shop at the left. You got Neo at the bottom right there. And they're African owned, because I did make sure they were African owned. And they look like Costa Coffee when you go in. And when I say they look quality, look at the quality of these coffee shops. They're not bric-a-brac coffee shops. They're modern facilities that you would have anywhere in the world, air conditioned, lovely facilities, lovely coffee, and you can buy a bit of food and other bits and pieces as well, juices and stuff like that. Next one. So let's have some stats on here. It's a very open market economy. They do encourage it to be home-owned. They encourage Rwandans to be in business, and they have the aspiration by 2050 to become an upper middle income country, and by 2035 a higher income country. So that's what they're aiming for. GDP at the moment, as I said, is 1.7 billion. That was it. It was 1.7 billion in 2005. And look at it by 2017. We're not talking doubled. We're not talking trebled. We're talking it multiples of growth in that period of time. And this is what I mean by, we can have all these idealistic notions about what the economy should be like in Africa, but at the end of the day, we need to grow the economy, because without a strong economy, we can't afford the healthcare, the hospitals, the infrastructure, and the development for the people. And we want our people's income to rise, because as their income rises, the quality of their life improves, and the quality of what they can buy and provide for their families improves. And we want to have a prosperous life just like anybody else in the West. And their biggest exports are mining, tourism, handicrafts, and coffee. And as I said, made in Rwanda is a big factor, okay, because they want the whole value chain based there. I've mentioned the smartphones already. And Alibaba, look at it on YouTube. Alibaba, the owner of Alibaba, a billionaire, said he apologized to Africans for being fearful of coming into Africa to do business. And then after he came to Rwanda, he decided to invest. He said he's going to invest in Africa every year now. And he wants to travel to Africa every single year. And he's given Rwandan people access to 1.3 billion people through Alibaba's. Alibaba is basically, for those who don't know, Alibaba is basically like the Amazon of China. Next one, please. Governance, I mentioned it before. They've got excellent governance in Rwanda. It's got a great reputation for the way the country is run, with zero corruption or virtual zero corruption, very intolerant corruption. You see bottom left, Rwanda governance scorecard. They believe and they publicly talk about their governance scorecard. They're very proud of being one of the best governed countries in Africa right now. They have loads of conferences and events. You'll see the government there in the top right-hand corner. And on the bottom left, you see the voluntary, those days. You see the military. If you look carefully, they're military. They use the military in Rwanda to do community work and community development. It's very, very important. Next one. Right, let's have a look at this. Rank the best country in improving quality of life, rule of law, accountability, and transparency in Africa. I mean, this is no small feat, considering it's quite a poor country. Best, improved. Rank the best country in improving quality of life, rule of law, accountability, transparency in Africa. These are big problems in Africa. Quality of life, poor. Rule of law, poor. Accountability, poor. Transparency, poor. This is all the criticisms we have of governments in Africa all the time. That you do a deal with China, what's the deal? It's not transparent. We don't know how it was agreed, what's the conditions, what's going on. These are the kind of things that we have for citizen-centered governance. So in local areas, they're encouraged to participate and be empowered in local populations. You know, if you're a mayor or a local councillor or minister in Rwanda and you don't deliver for your people, the government president will just sack them, get rid of them, because you haven't delivered. If you're not delivering against what you say you're going to do, get rid of you. So you have to deliver, and the people are accountable. You're accountable to the people. You look at this, increased levels of satisfaction. They check it and ask the people how satisfied they are with their local councils. How many people are satisfied with local councils in Britain? From 59%, nearly 60% to 77%. And constituents from 29% up to 42% by 2017. So it's improved. All branches of the government have to sign vows and contracts with ministers and provinces, villages, all of those areas to commit to targets. And state employees are also ranked and tested across a set of governance scorecards. I was doing this in local government in England from 2000 when I used to inspect councils. They're doing it in Rwanda. How many other African countries are holding the civil service and ministers to account with a scorecard? It's serious business. Next one, please. We're nearly finished. I think that's it, actually. That's the end. So you've got time for questions now. So bottom right is the convention center on the inside, and the top left is on the outside, the Kigali Convention Center. So I would challenge everybody to go and visit Rwanda so you can see it for yourself. If you want to see an African country that's excellent, Rwanda's the one to go to. In my opinion, it's got to be on your bucket list of places to travel to.